Weekly Download, a podcast about interesting games, industry news.
Brought to you by Big Games Machine.
Speaking about there being nowhere else to go, if you're looking for all of your weekly video game news and analysis, why go anywhere else? And there you go.
Worth being.
Yeah, only place worth being. That is the Weekly Download. Welcome back to the Weekly Download, brought to you by Big Games Machine. And I'm back. I had a leave of absence last week. I was not available to host, but I trust that Jack and Alex, of course, who is back with me today, I trust you. You both made sure to turn the lights off when you left and kept everything tidy. I'm very pleased with how tidy the studio looks.
I left it all to Jack. I can claim no. You can claim nothing on that.
You're just the talent.
You did all the heavy lifting.
You're the talent.
I'm the revolving chair. I'm struggling to get out of it at the moment, I think, is the issue.
It's okay. I think everyone's happy to have you. I'm happy to have you back. I don't think we're going to be looking at any paintings today, unfortunately.
That was my
little reference if you haven't seen. Not last week, but the week before. Go and check out that episode where we took a look quickly at some Nintendo fan art. But in today's episode, no fan art, like I've said, unfortunately. But we're going to be covering the ESA's report on US kids' Christmas gaming wishes, what the American children are wanting this Christmas. And spoiler alert, it's video games, which is maybe not a surprise considering we're talking about it today. We'll also be having a look at the state of gacha and live service games in Japan, which is a really interesting topic that continues to swirl and have its, goes up, it goes down, but it's always relevant. And then the last thing we're going to be looking at is it's in the news at the moment, but we're going to be taking a look at attitudes towards unionization in the industry following the 2025 Games Industry Salary Report. Right.
It does feel like every episode I'm on comes down to unions as the last story.
I mean, you've been on the last three and they've all been looking at it, so it's one of them. It's a shame we're covering it last as well. I wish we did maybe pushed it up now that you said that. But anyway, if we dive into our first story, and this is all about the ESA's report, which has gone to a load of American kids, children, and parents, and it's basically just done a load of data gathering to see what spending habits, I guess, are looking like regarding video games as we're in the run-up to Christmas. And I think the real standout from this, Alex, is that we've got a lot of data here, but 43% of kids in the US want in-game currencies as Christmas gifts. So V-Bucks, Robux, I believe.
Robux, yes.
Robux, yeah. They all have a similar sounding name, but I mean, yeah, this is unusual. I think for us, I know we've got a slight gap in age, but we both grew up wanting physical video games for Christmas. This feels very foreign territory to me, and I'm sure it does you as well.
I was nearly into double digits before I even had a video game system. I was on those little LCD things when I was starting out, so I'm not a great example for this. But yeah, it's a huge... I mean, I don't have children, but there are friends' children and things around me in life, and it certainly seems to be a growing lean towards it. A handful just want new games. Oddly, those are the ones that seem to be tuned into like watching lots of YouTube channels and jumping between things. And then there are those that are like deeply into Roblox or Fortnite, whatever the game of the moment is. What is strange about it though, and what I'd really like to see is the percentage breakdown, because obviously we're using video games as a catch-all here, but Fortnite and Roblox specifically are such huge platforms in themselves. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if well over half of that percentage is going straight into those two, the pockets of those two, and it's not a broader appeal, or maybe 3 or 4 games that are literally taking up all of that. So I wonder how informative this really is to industry trend, or how much it is just to like the dominance of these handful of titles.
Yeah, I think you're right. I do think, though, it does still inform on those trends. But yeah, to reiterate, I definitely think you're on the money, Alex, in terms of this. I think a lot of that 43% is going to be concentrated within a few games. And we'll talk about live service games in a bit, and I think this is part of the struggle, is that it's dominated by a few. But I do think it's, I know I joked before, but I think the most interesting thing, without looking at the breakdowns, is the fact that this is a real shift that we're seeing. And I think it's that greater story of the fact that people of all ages are playing less games. They tend to play the same games for longer. And a lot of game time is in what we'd call these legacy titles, things like Fortnite and Minecraft and Grand Theft Auto, FIFA, where people are playing the same games for years, and that's where all their money and time is going, rather than playing a game, finishing it, and buying something else.
You used to be an Xbox kid, now you're a Roblox kid. Lots of X's in the games industry. But yeah.
You sounded really down with the kids then, I must say. That's that can be Xbox's next marketing campaign, is get down with the kids of Xbox.
Just a mid-40s gentleman telling people direct to camera. I'm sure it'll go down really well. So I mean that, it is. I don't know how much of the change there. I guess what I'm saying is, of the shift is just the world is going more digital. Like, obviously that's a large part of it. This couldn't have been done when I was a child. I didn't even know what the internet was. But it's just indicative, I think, of the way things are shifting. But the rest of the study gets quite interesting. I mean, you shared this study with me just before we jumped on, and I kind of had a quick glance at it. And it is really fascinating that they've tried to do it. But the actual numbers involved, specifically of the children, not so much of the adults, there were a lot more questioned. Obviously, how rigorous you've got to be when you're questioning 18 to 65-year-olds, I think, was the next bracket. Whereas within the, is it 3 to 17 or 5 to 17-year-olds?
3 or 5.
Yeah, being asked. There were only 700, which when you break it down is like one child in each age range by state. So it's not definitive. And plus the mail out went to, I can't remember the name of the body now. It wasn't the ESA's mailing list it went out to. It was like an online, it was the YouGov's online panel. But within that, you've got to imagine that those people are self-selectingly interested.
Very switched on
online, exactly. And their children probably take some of that as well. So I think we have to take some of it with a grain of salt in terms of the full robustness of the study. But it is definitely indicative of, I guess even within that, people who are, even kids who are engaged, are looking at digital currency rather than new games.
I don't feel like that's much of a surprise anyway. If I was like wandering down the street tomorrow and some 8-year-old came up to me and was like, I tell you what, the soundtrack and the combat in Clair Obscur Expedition 33, I can see why it's winning Game of the Year. I'd be really confused by that. But no, I mean, I think it's true. I think what you're saying is true. We have to make sure we're not taking things too literally. But I think the trends that this data show are still interesting. I think as well, one of the other stats that we've pulled is 39% of the kids surveyed are asking for consoles. So clearly demand for hardware is high. I think inevitably, we can be honest, that's going to be massively driven by the Switch 2. And probably the original Switch, if there's discounts on it that you imagine there will be with the availability of the Switch 2 now. But yeah, I mean, we see a lot of things about. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, you imagine it's got to be the Switch 2, because at some point they're playing these live service games that they want to be playing. What upgrade are they looking for to get more out of that? It's got to be the new toy that's attracting people within that equation, I imagine. Especially going back to my earlier point that was kind of pushing on how this is a self-selecting group. You've got to imagine that also they have one in the house already and they're already kind of tech savvy and have those. So you've got to imagine it's the new thing, unless it's a case of siblings wanting their own within that environment. But
that takes me back. That takes me back. Sharing, having the family Wii, family Game Boy. Be like, you can't
family
play.
Game Boy is cruel.
Well, I think we had. I think we had
but...
two. We had two. So between three of us, it was tricky. But yeah, I think that's the Switch 2 effect, really. We've seen a lot of analysts say that this was going to happen, that it would drive hardware sales, and predictably it has. I know that a lot of people earlier in the year and before the Switch 2 came out, were quite negative on its chances, which I found bizarre. I think regardless of the price point, and it's something else that we've seen with this data, which is regarding the level of spending, people are still, even though economically things are not as strong as they have been, people are still looking at new hardware, they're looking at new games and still considering them not essential things, but in terms of gift giving, it doesn't seem that there's been any real impact in terms of interest and engagement with new hardware. People are still buying it. People are still picking it up, regardless of the cost. Which I know, especially for US people as well, which is where this data's from. We've seen the effect of tariffs on the price of Switch 2 hardware and software, and by all accounts, it's not deterring people. Which take from that what you want, but it feels like gaming is very much remaining a constant want and need within kids and adults. But I think before we move on, the last data point which I'd just like to touch on briefly is this stat that over half of children surveyed were keen to play more games with their parents. And within 5 to 7 year olds, this jumps to 73%, which, I think it's maybe something where people might assume that over the past few years, gaming is often considered quite a solitary and solo experience, but there's clearly still a demand within younger players to have those experiences with parents, and those more family-friendly experiences are still popular.
And I remember forcing uncles and parents to try and play. I think it was Strider. I was trying to make somebody play when I was on my Atari ST back when I was I guess I would have been 9 or 10, and really, really keen. Like you want the adults in your life, the people you care about, to be invested in your hobbies. You want them to like it, and trying to teach them pushing up on a joystick made you jump was
a very novel concept.
It was weird. It's more challenging than you think when you haven't grown up with it. But I think, that's something where now parents will have, and bringing them in to play is something that, the parents already have the kind of skills and knowledge of gaming to do that. I think the problem actually comes in, like, most parents don't want to play whatever, grow a garden on Roblox or whatever else it is. Which is where games like Split Fiction and It Takes Two are obviously been incredibly successful, because it fills that gap that, like a Disney film, like there are things in there that are entertaining
for everyone
as well as the children.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And they do a really good job of balancing that. So, maybe there's a massive gap there in the market beyond just the handful that there are already.
Maybe. I mean, if we're looking at places where there might not be gaps in the market, we can take a look at our second story today, which is this quite damning stat, I think, but we're not surprised by it. But 70.9% of gacha and live service games in Japan are discontinued by their third year. And this is data that's been pulled from research on just under 2,200 games that have been shut down.
Is this only Japan data? Sorry.
Yeah, so this is just data from Japan. So I think we've got to consider that, but I think it will inform global trends. But I think, we're both aware, Alex, of how especially gacha is such a big thing in Asia, but I think the live service stuff applies to everyone really, and I think it's something that you don't need to be within the industry to really see that this is the case. But I think that we're starting to see really good data that shows that it is happening. It's an interesting point, because obviously a live service game has to continue to make money on an ongoing basis for 3 years, and in this case it's after 3 years that they stop. There's the kind of stop. That's the kind of how long they run those for. And when you think about it, there are very few games that are not live service games that you play for more than 3 years. So at some point you're like, how much of this is just like natural attrition of games? Maybe this is how long it should last. Maybe 3 years should be considered successful, not necessarily going past it, because at some point I'm sure even the developers want to move people over onto the next thing, which wipes the board of the money they've spent, starts them off again, avoids power creep, avoids that idea of balancing people that have been there for 3 years and the kind of the roster of fighters they've got to go up against the newcomers, which is always massively challenging on how you balance that. And then they're always inevitably, one person on Reddit will say they're overpowered, and then the next person on Twitter or YouTube says that they're underpowered, and it's a real nightmare.
Yeah, you balance, when you're balanced, you look at like games that are like constantly trying to refine balancing and get everybody to the right level. When that roster is growing like month on month, you're just adding new characters, and you've got to be like, well, this power goes against this, and it ends.
I mean,
up breaking,
that is why you'll never see another roster the size of Ultimate if we're looking at Smash Brothers. I think that Sakurai, not to go off on a different topic, but I know that's something that Sakurai has spoken about and saying that we cannot do this again, because if one person is slightly out of line, then inevitably everyone else has to be adjusted, and it can become a real nightmare. But I do think you're right when you talk about if these games last for 3 years. Well, that is quite a long time. I guess it's a question of, on the developer and publisher side, what are the expectations? When these games are being developed, are they being developed with an understanding that because of the nature of both gacha and live service markets, unless you're a real mega hit, you're not going to last in the way that, we have, like Genshin Impact is probably one of the biggest ones, and that just seems to triumph continuously, but there's so few examples like that. So is this a case where developers and publishers just have to be realistic about what a success can be?
I mean, there were 20. I've got the numbers up in front of me. 2,200 games closed in the first 3 years. Then with another 30% on top of that in Japan alone. Japan's populous, but that's a lot of games to be out. Like, how many games?
Yeah, and for people to be spending all the money in as well. That's a lot.
You can't imagine yourself jumping between multiple gachas. Like, you've got one, maybe two. I did for a long time. I was deeply into AFK Arena and Fire Emblem.
Fire Emblem, yeah, you liked Fire Emblem, didn't you?
I mean, I was doing the monthly thing on that. It was massively, logging in every day and getting involved with that. And then, you get out the habit, and you're 3 years in, you're like, it's fine, I don't need to go back. Yeah, it's kind of like considering that if the game is launching, I'm being mealy-mouthed here, if the game is launching with an expectation of making their game back in the first year, and anything beyond that is gravy, and, if they're keeping that flywheel going and it's continuing to make money and they can scale back on everything on the back end, then fine. But these are all games that require, like, servers be up all the time, constant update, balances, fixes, all of that. Like, it's got to be making money. Yes, it absolutely sucks for people who put in money or are invested in the gacha, and then they lose all of that because there's nowhere for it to go.
I think it's just a reality, though, of the model, isn't it? That I think people, like you said, it's a case where you can understand people's frustration when it happens, but it's not a single player RPG that you've got a PS2 disc for. If you push that into a PlayStation 2 and it doesn't work, you have every right to have an issue with it. With these games which are entirely dependent on the live service model, I think you have to be coming into them with the expectation that they're not going to last. I mean, one of the things that I found from looking into this was that sometimes even the successful ones get shut down, and that's something. So we've got this example here with Dragon Quest of the Stars, which was closed down after 10 years, not for any reason, not for a negative reason, not because they weren't making money or people weren't playing, but it got shut down purely because they were unable to do anything else with it, because the code was such a mess that there were so many technical issues they were having that they had to shut it down. So that's like the other end of this, is that even if you make it all that time, inevitably, these longer lasting live service games, most of them eventually will have to stop anyway, just because of the passage of time, and there's not much you can do about that.
Oddly, it reminds me of what happened with, was it Telltale? I always get Tales of Traveller's Tales and Tales of all the Tales games.
All the
people
Tales.
Did Wolf Among Us and
Telltale.
Dead. Yeah, and they were kind of ploughing forward, and they always had this very aggressive, like, seasonal calendar, and eventually their engine just got older and older, and because they had such an aggressive calendar of content, same with a live service game, you don't get time to go back and address problems with the engine. So eventually the whole thing kind of collapsed under its own weight as they got more ambitious, but the tech couldn't keep up. And even more so when, you've got to, in a live service model, you've got to keep the money coming in, so you need to release new stuff.
A regular intervals,
you don't get time to go back and correct the problems. Yeah, it's a fascinating thing. I will also say very quickly that 70% of games not making 3 years will probably make a lot of the, 30%. That would imply to me 30% have definitely made it. If a live service game is
which
going
is quite
beyond 3 years,
high.
It's quite good when you consider, like,
Concord made a week, Steam, so
I mean, games on Steam are like that. 30% would probably be I don't know if that would be a positive number. I'm sure we've talked about it before, and I don't have the numbers in my head, but that feels like quite a good success rate compared to what's put out there.
I mean, I'd say so, but we need to like reframe this argument, I think, and because it's a really good point. I mean, I think before we move on, this last thing to look at is this idea of gacha free games, where we're seeing some studios who are announcing free to play games that have completely removed those monetization elements. And I know we say it a lot. Maybe you didn't say it last week because I wasn't here, but I think this is just one to keep an eye on. That's what I'm going to say.
Well, yeah, I will. Like, that idea of removing gacha doesn't remove the idea that there's always going to be something there to buy.
Oh yeah, of course.
The chance element. But what I will say is, like, and I know there are a lot of commentators out there where their kind of thing is like, the problem isn't having a lot to spend. The problem is the addictive quality of not knowing what's coming when you open something. Like, it trips something in your brain. People who are prone to addiction or gambling issues can be sucked into that. And I listen to some commentators who discuss it, and like some guy who's been playing FIFA. This is obviously FIFA Ultimate Team's been out for a while now, so in some regards disregard this. Yeah, but before that, suddenly all those people that were quite happily playing FIFA with possible gambling issues, suddenly have this presented to them within part of the game, and that's an issue. And perhaps to safeguard themselves, they have to remove themselves from it. So removing that element and the psychological tricks they play that kind of keep the endorphins rush, that gives you that endorphin rush that kind of drives further purchases, is probably a healthy thing. And there's still plenty of ways to continue to make money out of them. The live service.
Oh yeah, I mean, you look at something like Fortnite, where all that monetization comes from the skins and outfits, and there's no, I mean, I'm not going to say 100% certainty because I don't play it, but as far as I'm concerned, there's no elements to that where, you have these loot box-esque things going on. It's very much a case of, you're playing the game for free. If you want to buy this, it's expensive for what you're getting, but there's a degree of forgiveness because A, it's not a more manipulative system, and B, people are playing the game for free for endless hours. But maybe that works with Fortnite because it's as big as it is. If other studios try this, maybe it's not. Maybe the gacha is what allows the revenue to be where it is, and that directly informs the decision making, doesn't it?
Yeah, I don't know where
you can say no.
I'm sat here thinking, like, ultimately people should be spending the money they intend to spend, and if you have X amount, and if you're going to make an allowance or save up to get the thing you want, then it's better that you're paying for that rather than being tricked into, I say tricked, that's unfair, but spending $1, $2, $3 at a time and that kind of bankrolling, and you not realizing how much you've spent. At least, again, that goes down to the kind of gambling idea. But having an idea and being able to budget that for yourself and see it happen in real time might just make people's spending habits on
look at that
purchase be a bit healthier.
This has become very wholesome. We're offering like tips for not spending money in gacha games. There you go. That could be a little spin-off. We'll do a segment every week about gaming therapy.
Wholesome corner.
But yeah, wholesome corner. In wholesome news, maybe not. If you're Rockstar, maybe not wholesome news.
Maybe not. Something.
But we've got the last big story we're going to look at today. I know, Alex, you made your little jibe about unionization. 3 for 3. We're looking at stuff surrounding unions, and this is data that's been pulled from GDC's 2025 Game Industry Salary Report. And within that report, what GDC do is they basically sit down with a load of developers, some employed, some not employed, just developers. I believe just within the US, but out of all of those surveyed, 64% of workers support union. That's going to have to be cut.
No, keep it.
No, come on. Out of all of those surveyed, 64% support unionization and 56% express a direct interest in joining one, which, I mean, I can't compare that to previous data because it's not something that I've gone and looked at. But I think it's a very clear sign of those workers looking at the last couple of years and thinking, I love this industry. And I know this is something you will talk about. I love this industry. I'm prepared to work myself to the bone for this industry, but I need to protect myself. And that's what a union can provide.
There's so many parts to this, and all of it's impacted by not to bring this into broader politics, but the cost of living increasing for everybody all the time, and that just puts pressure on everything. And the more unsafe your job becomes, or the less fun you're having at work. Like, I know that there's kind of element in this story of toxicity in the workplace, the lack of work-life balance that comes with, bringing it back to this, crunch and elements like that. Like, you are not feeling valued in the role because you're not feeling like you're not being seen, or you're not getting that validation or validation. And obviously you want both. Like, don't get me wrong, people would like to feel like they're being appreciated and get money. But if you're not getting either, then like that undermines everything within that. Exactly. And I think the desire for unionization doesn't just, obviously money is a large part of it. And I know that kind of comes into the discussion, but I think it's far more wide reaching. It's as much about security as it is any other part of it. Because I think at the moment, people are just very nervous about paychecks when, you're seeing so many massive companies that are making money also being people to make layoffs.
I mean, yeah, I know we've touched on the Rockstar stuff before, and that's still something where it's hard to discuss, I think, too much, because it's not, I feel like you're never going to know the reality of that situation. But I think what we've seen in the aftermath of that is a huge backlash from Rockstar employees, which obviously my opinions are my own, but that to me, it makes me feel that, what Rockstar have tried to do is union busting to some degree. And I think
this massively predates that data. This is from GDC 25, which would predate anything with Rockstar in terms of interest already. Like, I'd be keen to see what these numbers have changed into over the last month.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, true. Yeah, that's true. That's true, actually. That is true. But yeah, I mean, you're right. You'd imagine that. I think something like that will backfire on Rockstar. I think we've seen that. I don't think it's a surprise to me that all of that starts happening and then GTA 6 gets another delay, in my opinion, because I think they very quickly realised that people aren't quite happy to deal with that. I mean, it's what you said, Alex. I think, you don't work at a company like Rockstar without that love for what you do, because it's a hard job, it's a hard company to work at, but B, you're talented because you're working at one of the best studios in the world. And, it's a case of people clearly wanting that security, I think, is the biggest thing. Financial things are always a consideration, but I think it is that security.
Yeah, if the money's going to keep coming in, if you're just making by, that's okay. But if you don't have that security, you want to be able to put some aside so you're safe if it doesn't. And that's where, unions can come in and also fight for kind of your rights if the worst does happen, and, ensuring that you have some kind of blanket.
What I think's interesting though is, and if we play like devil's advocate, is that successful unionization is going to lead to probably higher salaries in the US, higher insurance, more benefits, working hours are going to be more controlled, and that's great whilst everyone still has their job. But, and this isn't me saying this is what I want, but I think it's something we have to consider, is that, you're seeing the advancement of AI and the role that that's beginning to take in a lot of studios. And that in combination with this more aggressive push for unionization, in the short term, it might be really great for developers. And don't get me wrong, that's what I want for them. But there is this looming spectre of, if you're more of a nuisance to these studios, it's just something that I support unions, but it's interesting because I can imagine there'll be some stakeholders and the people at Rockstar and higher ups in these bigger publishers and companies who will be turning around and going, well, if that starts happening here, then...
Well, I mean, it's a very hard thing to measure. Like, I don't think that... And there's two elements to it. Well, two elements that spring to mind for it is the companies that are going to fight hardest to stop it are probably the ones that can afford it most easily. which is always the way these things seem to happen. Obviously, they're protecting a profit margin because a lot of the times they're answerable to shareholders. Like, I appreciate it's not as simple as, you've got money, why can't you do it? Like, I'm not making that argument, but it is certainly a factor. And the other thing is that comes out as part of that is a lot of the people that are concerned about the list of people that are concerned. One of them is people earning less than $100,000, which, with translation it's not bad money, but I think it probably doesn't go very far if you're being forced to live in some of the tech.
Well, where all the studios are, which
Exactly.
is it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? It is that, especially in the US, I think the US is the biggest example of this. And it's why, and I know we were speaking, I don't know if this is within the episode or before, but we're talking about the fact that Marvel Rivals laid off NetEase, who own Marvel Rivals, pushing away their US studio in the aftermath of that success. And people are, why have they done this? It's because where all these studios are in the US, it's the places with the highest cost of living. It's the places where the offices are the most expensive to rent. All the, everything around these studios is expensive. So that gets passed on to the salaries and the benefits, and that's what the studios are paying. So
it's because 70% of live service games die in the first 3 years.
So it comes back to, that's in Japan.
It does.
That's in Japan.
If those numbers were to hold true across everything, let's just say, that means they've got to keep it profitable.
We are back. Now, if you're listening or watching, you will be thinking, what are we back from? But that's the beauty of editing. But if you are watching, you're probably now seeing Alex on the other side of the screen, which is nice. But we had a few technical difficulties, but that will not stop us from doing the rapid rundown.
It didn't stop me.
I know it didn't. And you might never see what Alex was saying because it might end up on the cutting room floor, but we'll see. But, it's our tradition. We love to have these conversations where we look at these topics in depth. And then at the end, we like to go through and take a look at a few of the smaller stories from the week. Some small, some still big, but not quite big enough to make it. But the first of these, and this makes me really happy, is that if anyone's familiar with the Switch ports of Rocket League, not the original, Doom 2016, Doom Eternal, all of those ports, which, considering the hardware, came out really well, were done by Panic Button, who have gone on to do a lot of porting work for, I believe they handled the Forza port to PS. They're basically one of the best porting houses in the industry now. And it turns out that a bunch of the Nintendo Switch games, I know Super Mario Odyssey was one, but a load of the Switch games which got enhanced Switch 2 updates, not additions. I have to be very particular about the language here because we know what Nintendo's like. But these games that got Switch 2 updates were handled by Panic Button. And it's the first time that Nintendo directly have gone to Panic Button and said, hey, can you work on these parts for us? And by all accounts, they've done a really good job. So shout out Panic Button, because they
absolutely
got a good reputation, and for very good reason.
Yeah, always fun to see Nintendo shouting out their partners, especially when they're non-Japanese. It feels a little
unusual.
Like a real mark of honor. I remember that Ubisoft thing where the guy that made Mario Rabbids came up on stage and was basically crying because
Miyamoto
was like, come on up. He's like, I've been acknowledged by Miyamoto.
Well, I mean, not to go too deep into this, but it's interesting because we've seen Nintendo in the last few years of the Switch era, and I think they've always been like this to an extent, but they've really made an effort to put everything under the Nintendo banner. So even though they have their internal studios, you don't tend to know which teams developed a game until the credits come after you finished it. It's something that they're very keen to package everything under the Nintendo brand. So I think even though in this case it's Panic Button who have been speaking about it, it's interesting to me that Nintendo have even given them the green light to be public about that, because it feels quite unusual in them acknowledging that work on their IP has been done by a not even just a non-Nintendo studio, but by an American studio at that as well.
And completely external, right? They're in no way affiliated with Nintendo. They're not like a second party.
Yeah, just
style jobby.
They're their own thing, which is what makes it so. I bet that was a fun meeting where they're like, "We want you to take Super Mario Odyssey and make it look amazing on the Switch too. Don't screw it up."
And people in the industry do it for the love, and they probably do. I don't want to make any assumptions around.
Yeah, Nintendo, like, we're not paying you a dime, but you can have a Switch too early if you want. Anyway, in other news, another really nice story. Earlier this year, Riot shut down Hytale, which was this super ambitious voxel Minecraft-esque game that has been in development for years. And eventually Riot kind of turned around. They were like, right, we can't, after 4 years, you've not given us anything, so we're going to have to move this to the side. Well, the IP has been bought back by the original creator, who's also brought in a load of the staff from the original project as well, which is really nice. And they've already started showing off a few bits from the game, and I think it's very much a work in progress, but it's really nice to see, by all accounts, were really good in the process as well, and we're quite happy to let this happen. So it's just a good story.
It probably goes around in a big circle where the game just wasn't going to make it as a massive live service game, which is what Riot probably need to justify.
They looked and said, this ain't lasting 3 years.
Exactly. And they were like, well, somebody else was like, well, we can make it for less, or we don't need as much profit to make it work, or we're going to put it out as a single player experience. Like there's a dozen ways that a company like Riot probably puts greater pressure than a small studio picking it up, and they're going to have all those assets that have been created in the years this has been in development. They might make something incredible.
Oh yeah, I think this is a best case scenario, and what you've said, Alex, is 100% true. I think people are very quick to demonize a company like Riot in this situation where it's, why have you shut this down? Why don't you want to keep funding it, and so on and so forth. But yeah, it's just everyone wins in this situation because the players still get a game at the end of it. Riot kind of wash their hands of it and don't have to worry about dealing with the studio and the staff and everything that comes with that anymore. And the original creators who made this game and this idea with passion now get to take it back and release it. So it feels like a rare time in the industry where everyone wins in a situation, which is why I wanted to highlight it. And then finally, for this week's Rapid Rundown, another situation actually where I think that everyone's kind of winning who's involved. Unity and Epic Games have announced a collaboration, which amongst other things, probably the biggest one to me is the fact that games made in Unity will now be available in Fortnite, which seems like a huge boon for Unity developers, I would say, getting that free exposure.
Just to check, your wording, this is a me thing, can be made available in Fortnite or will be, like they just no opt-in, just like every Unity game.
They're all going. I think it's a case of if you want it to be, you can. It's not just that every single Unity, all those Steam shovelware games just...
Yeah, just like fill that thing up. That'll probably be some of those. We'll make.
Well, maybe. But yeah, I mean, again, we don't like to go too deep with these stories, but I saw this earlier in the week and I just thought that's unusual. It feels like competitors are coming together to help each other, which...
Yeah, but like you say, it works for Unity because more people are going to buy games created on the platform, and I think they get money however many games are sold on the platform or used. And I suspect one of the biggest pressures on Fortnite is becoming a kind of platform in the same way Roblox is for different game types and things, and this solves that in a heartbeat because suddenly they're all going out. Yeah,
I mean, it's another win-win, isn't it? I think when you first look at it, it seems odd, but when you look into the specifics, and I always say, as always, every story which we talk about today will be in the description, all the links, so you can go and check them out and give this one a read. But yeah, it just feels like a good idea. I think especially for Unity, they've had a rough couple of years, and I think this is a really, like I said, I think this is a really good thing for them, because I feel like the people seem to have a bit of a negative opinion of the Unity engine now, and I don't get that. I think that's quite misinformed. It seems to be something where people are like, it's a shovelware engine and that's not how game engine works. But this is just a nice chance for Unity to, for Unity developers to get people playing their game. Hopefully we just won't have a repeat of the Italian brain rot lawsuit. Shout out again. I think that was an episode 2 weeks ago where we spoke about that, or maybe 3 weeks ago.
I think 3. I don't remember.
Okay, if you don't remember, then you weren't there.
Maybe that's the brain rot setting in.
It could be. But on the note of brain rot, this podcast isn't that, but it is a wrap. We've wrapped up for today. Thank you as always for tuning in, whether you're watching, listening, or however you're consuming the weekly download. We both thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe. Whether you subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever it is, make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you'd rather, and I know I always say it, but if you'd rather read your news rather than listen to Alex and I, first of all, hey, come on, we sound great. But second of all, if that is what you'd prefer, feel free to subscribe to our weekly download newsletter, which is available via LinkedIn. Or if you're thinking, Tom, there's too many stories in the industry, it's all swirling around my head. There's too much going on. Well, don't worry, because we've also got the daily download. Monday to Friday, it comes straight to your inbox around lunchtime every day. If you're in the UK or Europe, if you're in the US, it's the best morning read you can have because you get all the stories for the day already there to your inbox. Be sure to sign up using the link below. And other than that, I will say goodbye from me. Alex, as always, I appreciate you becoming a bit of a regular here, and it's great to chat. And we'll be back next week.
I think I might take a break next week, so I'll see you soon.
Oh, he's got to stay. Can't be on too often. You've got to keep people wanting for more.
Exactly.
Which is fair enough. But yeah, we'll be back next week with more stories and trends. Even if Alex won't, I will. So I will catch you then. And thank you all for listening.